We are two artists who know each other socially, but don't know our work very well. We've seen it around town, and we're gonna talk about what we did for the Peter show at the box first. And Tanya was gonna tell me about the Gatorade Please, which must have a title.
It does. It's called CVS, which is the store, but it's also the acronym for this anxiety-related disorder that I have called cyclic vomiting syndrome, which is as fun as it sounds. And it involves drinking a lot of Gatorade to stay hydrated. So I just, I don't like to be too serious with idling, or I don't know. I like a good level of stupid.
That's good.
But
Gives me access to suddenly gives me access both to your mental workings and to your bodily functions all at once.
the dysfunctions of both of those things, yeah. No, and that's something that in like having seen some of your work before and the piece at the box and also looking through your website, the more that I was reading about it, I'm like, oh, I feel like we both have this connection to humor and like play in this way that not everyone approaches work in that direction, which I really appreciate about your work.
Yeah, definitely. There's a sense of definitely play, and then the humor comes in from just like letting things be, which automatically ends up being funny if you're just being if you're revealing and being
Yeah.
Yeah, and absurd and acknowledging
Yeah.
it's just silly. Just this business of having a body in the world is kind of absurd.
Yeah, and vulnerable. So I went to this residency, and on the way there, I stopped off to visit my dad, and he is this like Soviet inventor, electrical engineer in retirement, and he keeps. I grew up with everything was jerry rigged. Like the toaster had to kind of be hot wired. Like the doorbell would only work if you did something weird to it. Like, and it was really frustrating because I just wanted things to be normal and I wanted things to work, and everything was always like 3 steps more than you need. Um, and and my dad's not really interested in art. He always kind of saw it as this weird thing that I do. And at some point we kind of started developing this language for communicating with each other, which was me recognizing that what he does is a form of practice, like it's an art practice. Like at some point, this was like 2 years ago, he finally acknowledged that he's not trying to make things work, and like that was never the point.
Whoa.
And it was so like, and I'm like, you're making art, and he doesn't care at all. He's like, yeah, I guess so, whatever, so what. So I kind of started collaborating with him via FaceTime, where I'd call him, and I don't know anything about electronics. He doesn't know anything about sculpture. And I would just have him talk me through how to do stuff. So I was going to this residency a year ago, and I met with him and we started talking about like, I'm just getting him to download this information into me. And the other thing with talking to him is he doesn't talk about feelings ever, but he'll talk about electronics for long enough and it becomes really poetic and kind of powerful, but he'll never admit that's what he's doing. So it like kind of goes in this weird roundabout way, and you're like, oh, that was like a parable of something. And he's like, oh, I'm just talking about physics. So then I went to this residency and I started having these like really bad, nauseous, sort of anxiety related cyclical issues. And I was drinking a lot of Gatorade and just kind of feeling shitty the whole time. And it was by the ocean, and I just started saving every bottle of Gatorade that I drank while I was there. And at the end, I like filled them with seawater and made this little battery that powered a light, which is something he talked me through doing. And the fluid in the battery is called an electrolyte, and Gatorade, and it was just a really like much smaller, simpler gesture. And so the piece of the box came out of that, and it's like a much bigger, more like formally, polished version of that.
They appropriately cited it because it's got this claustrophobic, contained feel to it, right? And then it glows at the same time.
Yeah.
So it's both expanding and shrinking. So
that's interesting. I didn't think about the expanding and shrinking. I was really excited about the low light, and I wanted to think about like moving around something in a circle, and just how we think about time with this kind of progress through this linear, like being productive, leading towards something. And moving in a circle can be a lot more generative sometimes.
Right. Then, I mean, and of course, the thing that you're saying, it's a cyclical vomiting syndrome.
Right. There's that too.
Right.
I don't know. I don't talk about that very, very much. And I don't know, it's weird to talk about, I think, illness. Like we never know what to make of that with talking to others. So.
When you're living with something for so long, it probably affects things, and you might as well acknowledge it, if it's not just a passing thing.
Yeah.
So,
well, and I guess that any kind of like altered bodily thing gives you a different perspective on just the everyday world that that's usually, I mean, I don't know, I feel like sometimes that's a richer understanding of something from a point of it not working quite right.
Right. Yeah. I mean, yeah, there's some parallel between the objects in your childhood home not quite working right either. It gives you an altered perspective on how things should work or might work.
Right.
Their potential to be absurd, which is kind of, or have failure built into them, which is kind of where somebody has a lot to do with that. They're not all functional. Functional, but it would take a little bit of extra work to make them function. I'm talking about a long-term project that started in 2018, where I attended elementary school for a whole year as a kindergarten student. And that came out of wanting to think through hierarchy and think through power differentials, but in a different way, which is anytime you have a self-other, there's going to be that kind of thinking. And so this is another way of thinking through self and other. I was approaching it from the point of view of performance and dance history, which is what Jenny had been talking to me about, and how it's how people are educated, and that was obviously her entry point to my piece for some reason. I'm like, well, I can do dance class. I think the project was done when I finished elementary school. It was just a live, engaged, living thing. I mean, I called it a lived performance, but it's just a thing that happened, and the institution experienced it, and every participant in the institution, from the child to the teachers to the staff to we all experienced this entry of a accepted but foreign body into the system of this adult called Neha Choksi, who's still a student. And I think that was the piece. It's just I was willing to re-engage with it, to re-encounter anew what I had done. And there's so many notes and objects from that experience that I haven't touched. I thought I would, but I still haven't touched them.
I'm curious, sorry, to just go back to the beginning of when you started talking about this project, when you're describing hierarchies, are you talking about the hierarchies between the adults and the children, or within a society that's formed by the little kids themselves?
It's the
I'm so curious how that works.
yeah, it's the hierarchies that are formed as a result of the adults telling.
Okay.
So the invention, there's already a hierarchy in your family, obviously, but this is the first time you're experiencing any sort of sociality as well as power differentials in a sustained way outside of your family. It's like the moment you get socialized, when you start school, and but how that then affects their own interactions, because it's once you're inculcated in a system and you learn this language, then you start using the language, right?
Right.
So,
Like the Stockholm syndrome almost.
exactly. So the task of the school often is to teach simultaneously hierarchy, which is mind-boggling to me. Like I'm and to teach inclusivity, right? It's like, don't exclude. But don't
But you do this.
Right. So learning how to equalize and yet learning how to have boundaries around power is pretty schizophrenic, and I kind of wanted to be in that space and observe it and be part of it, and be subject to it at the same time. At some point I got naturalized as a student, even for the teacher, who would correct me or tell me, like, you got to work faster, or like, just, you can do it, you can do it, like, because I was slow at certain things. But it's a process where, like, suddenly you just become naturalized, right? Like, at one moment you're not, and then suddenly you realize you are in the classroom, right? So and then
do you feel like I was just going to ask, do you feel like the kids fully embraced you as one of them at points?
They were not interested in why I did the project, but they were interested in how to make me part of the classroom the moment they were introduced to me. Their main concern was, like, ensuring that I knew which notebook to use at what point, or like what the writing utensils were, or what the playground rules were, or the playground the games were, or otherwise they weren't. They pretty much accepted that I was a student and that I had skills, like I could spell, so they could ask me for spelling if they were on my table. Not during a spelling test, but when they were just writing their stuff, and they really wanted to learn something. But then again, when we were just drawing together, or we were trying to accomplish tasks that I was slow at for whatever reason, then they would be encouraging, or would give me ideas or whatever. So it was sort of the idea of being a student, meaning that you're there to learn something, I think they were okay with. It's sort of akin to when I first came to Bombay, I did a project called Mehnaya Hoon, Who's in Town Anyway, is how I called it in English. It's not a translation. But that involved all these immigrants to Bombay, or people who are just freshly arrived to Bombay, and it was about their experience in some way. And I remember going to interview one of them, who the prerequisite was you had to, like, show me everything that you came to Bombay with. Like, so there he was in his trunk, and he was like showing me all his clothes, and like part of my project involved me turning around and saying, what would you say if I told you I wanted all your stuff? And that moment was the crux of the project. But he was the first person I interviewed, and he said, sure, you can have it, and it's all yours. And I was taken aback. I was like, wait a minute, like, why are you saying like that like just freaked me out? And his response was, well, if you asked for it, you must need it, you must want it. Right? And I didn't have that response from other people, but I did from him. But it's kind of that sort of acceptance of how a certain social interaction works for him, the immigrant, and also for the children in their school. Like, if someone tells you she's a student, right? Like,
Right. I've never been to, I didn't go to American kindergarten. And in reading that, I found like about your project of being a student, that was something that came up for me, was that like double remove of being an adult, and also of, then for you, it's your first time going through quite that experience in that way. And I'm sure also kindergarten now than when we were kids is quite different.
right, yeah. My first experience of school was actually in Miami.
Okay.
But it was preschool. I had some inkling of school, but I had no idea of how school actually functions in a lived way in the States, because I went from, kindergarten through 12th grade in India.
Right.
But I have taught at the lab school at UCLA, second and third grade.
Okay.
Then I taught in New York. I taught Latin in Santa Monica. I also taught at New Roads. So I have a longstanding interest in education, and obviously, yeah, I'm interested in it only not in as much as I am kind of anti-school. And I pretty much will tell everyone who will ask me not to go to school, like, what grad school should I go to? Oh, don't go. So,
I love how we made that jump from preschool to grad school in one sentence.
I think it's all one system.
Yeah.
And it's the system that, like, I know my friends' kids are going to school over here in like Sylvan surroundings, and with one of the schools is like where the parents are teachers, and whatever they know they teach, and it's
Wow.
like there are no set teachers.
Okay.
And I get that, but I also have something like I feel terrified when I think of like being told what to be learning. I'm just like, I just want some element of freedom accorded to the way someone grows up, and I don't have that much of a like the development of a common language is interesting, of a common culture, the language of a culture, the language of a society. But there should be like space for quirks and idiosyncrasies, which like school doesn't allow for you if you're all studying the same damn thing. So like, somebody might be interested in anteaters growing up. Like, let them study that.
Yeah.
I mean, I understand the reasons for all the goals, and I also have my sort of knee-jerk reactions to like, don't get socialized that way. So
just resist socialization generally.
Yeah. But you went to school, I'm assuming, in the Ukraine, or?
I did. Yeah, I went the first 3 grades in Ukraine, and then we moved to the Midwest in the 90s. And to be perfectly honest, when I was thinking about the idea of returning to kindergarten or first grade, I have this like kind of slight horror in the back of sort of my soul that my mind went to this like very authoritarian, sort of soul crushing thing that I didn't have a very good experience with early education there. And I think it made me think a lot about these, like I found the social orders between the kids to be kind of cruel sometimes, and like this amplified version of the issues that their parents have with each other. And yeah, I don't know. I kind of
You're
revert
right.
back to
You're
that
right.
state.
You're right. That's the whole hierarchy and power thing, which is like
Yeah.
gonna diminish that or in any way try to create a democracy. Like, how are you gonna, at least in the American context, how are you going about it? And you know, I mean, to my teacher's credit, whom I absolutely adore, she was an amazing teacher, like, and had been teaching for like 18 years at that point. And it was pretty grand to be in her class because she was very, very generous and very mindful of everyone and very much like trying to give everyone their space and their freedom. And like if they needed to go away, they needed to go away and it's fine. If they needed to like take a little nap, it was okay. And you know, like just not get on people's cases.
I saw, I feel like touch keeps coming up in your work.
Touch?
In different touch. Mm-hmm. Yeah, like with materials and between humans. I was looking at the work where you were smashing rocks and this, and I guess just again, going back to the sort of the meditative conversation. And there's also some really beautiful ways of relating to time, like geological time and this kind of process making. And I guess that's less related to the work that's at the box, but it seemed like an interesting. Maybe it is. I mean, it is. Yeah.
It actually is. So the work at the box is part of a 3-part work, actually.
Okay.
Or rather, the school project is part of a 3-part work in my head, which is a sort of self-species planet, you know, self-species planet type of.
Okay. Powers of 10.
Powers of 10 type of thing, yeah. So the self part was the faith and friction piece, which involved me and my friends on a 224-acre Jain ashram construction site in India, doing all these activities. But the question I was asking was, who am I? And in a very basic way, on my relations. And the second part is the school project, which is who are we as we get socialized? How do we get socialized? And the third part is who are we as a species on planet Earth? Like, who are we as part of this geological time scale?
But I guess the manifestations of that piece that I've seen, the performance of the box, the resulting drawing, like in a very basic way, you guys are on top of the paper. You're jumping around on it. You're crawling around on all fours. The kids are crawling on it, and
this is why I chose dance.
Yeah.
And also, when I first went into the project, I was observing movements. I basically was trying to figure out if there was a way for me to learn how they moved. And I came to the conclusion at the end of my year in the school that I'm not a trained dancer. I cannot and will not be able to do that. And hence my desire to go back to the dance class and work with the dance teacher. So touch and pose and like sort of our sort of proprioceptive and stereognostic sense that our bodies have was really part of my thinking around the piece. And it may not be geological time, gesture, but it may not be geological time that, you know, that I'm headed into geological time, but there is a sense of time embedded in the entire series of works, which is my relations that build over time. And there are people who are there whom I've known since I was in that first piece, Faith and Fiction, that I've known since I was in elementary school. My brother, whom I've known since he was born, who's also in the piece, all the way up to friends that I'd just made that last year, including one who came from LA for the piece. So it was a range. And then there's the school piece where I'm hoping I'm in touch with some of the classmates for much longer than just that 2018, 2019. So just working out, like, what does it mean for time to dilate in my lifetime for me as I'm experiencing the sense of time that some other material will experience over its lifetime,
Yeah. And how that changes you
Yeah.
as an observer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that whole thing, how that changes me as an observer, is exactly what happened with the who am I part and what the who are we in school part, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it changed me immensely as an observer, just to be at some point, some people were saying you're embedded. And I'm like, no, I'm not embedded. Like, that's not the language I want to use around this. It's a lived performance. I am living it. I'm in there. Yes, I ended up notes, but I didn't even want to use the language of participant observer. I didn't want to go into the sort of that anthropological mode, because I needed my brain to do something.
And you want to be changed.
Yeah. And it actually worked, because for the summer after that, I still had play dates, and it wasn't until I went back for the school's Halloween celebration. So they don't call Halloween, they call a harvest festival or something.
Mm-hmm.
And when I went back to the school for that harvest festival, that was the first time that I was like now faced with my classmates, and the switch turned from thinking of them as my classmates to realizing, oh my God, they're children, they're not my friends. I mean, they're my friends, but they're not my friends. Like, I didn't have that, like, my brain had gone into this space where I was like, I had equalized, I had normalized what had happened. And it took me that long for it to really snap into place that, no, Neha, these are kids running around you, and you cannot do what they're doing, and you're not going to go down that bouncy slide. And
oh wow, that's amazing. I had a studio visit recently where the Golden Record came up, the Carl Sagan. I didn't realize there were inscriptions on it, but I was looking at it, just like, oh my God, this is amazing. But thinking about this kind of like future artifact, like this idea of leaving a trace to be interpreted in the future that like can be understood through different perspectives or can be studied in different ways. I'm just looking at a lot of images of carvings and engravings, and this need to leave a mark that will be referred to in the future in relation to this kind of world of smart objects. This is like my other piece that was at the box was dealing with text from user manuals. But I feel like the one time that sort of really precise text and image become, I guess it's not fully de-authored, but it's like this need to communicate, like when it becomes language, it forces it to let go of like cultural pretensions. But then thinking about that, what happens when you then take the function away? So this like kind of like pure directive, or which is how the Golden Record came up, was I think they are trying to communicate a meaning, and then it's almost like the meaning almost doesn't matter. It becomes not about creating a cultural object, or I guess they work at trying to communicate culture. So back to square one, maybe.
I'm sure a lot of smart people worked on it and gave so much input, and that's everybody is represented the best they could, but in that way. But that reflects their time and their context. But I like what you're saying about the text for your work came from a user manual, and you remove the function. Then what happens? It becomes this pure text. Your curtain pieces. So maybe that's a good place.
Oh
They floated in the piece very ethereally, and but they had text that like really brought it down back to like here and into like this sort of space of unknowing. Like, fabric feels like it's going to envelope you. It's like a curtain that's soft and it's inviting. And then that text was like, like it puts a wall up, even though there's no wall. It sets up this like impenetrability. You're reading the words, you get it, but then it falls off the edge of the curtain, and you can't continue it.
So I wanted to create a scenario where you're engulfed in language that doesn't convey meaning directly. So to think about language that has a utility and that is trying to communicate directly, but because it's kind of removed from its context, you are confronting it as just pure words. And all the text in the curtains is pulled from different user manuals for like smart home devices, various like domestic electronics, and most of the text has to do with either machine time, so devices that um, have a timer that you have to set up in some way, or that have their own internal clock that runs and does something that's separate from our rhythm or geological time, or some kind of natural flow of time. Um, and just thinking about this experience of being surrounded by all these gadgets that all flow in their own sort of different time frames outside of us, and attempting to synchronize them with each other, but also just this kind of just total futility, the total garbageness that they all are, like all this plastic junk that we have that, will open your curtains at the right time and brew your coffee and whatever. And when I was talking to Jenny about the show, the curtains kind of came about as when you take the function out, it becomes a score for movement. So it's just telling you to, hold this for 4 seconds, tilt your head left, tilt your head right, like step this way. And there was this phrase that's, I don't actually remember where most of these came from, like they're so chopped up, but there was one that said inhale and exhale normally. And I just thought that was so dark as a user manual. Or no, it's from a steam inhaler. So it's
From a
from
what?
like a steam inhaler. Like if you so actually great for COVID. Like hot steam and opens your whatever. But that as like almost like a dance score of, and now we inhale and exhale normally. But I wanted to install the curtains in a three-dimensional space as a way of, you have to read and move at the same time, and kind of linking those paths. Like they're both kind of linear, even though the text isn't really linear. So trying to link this act of moving, maybe trying to enact something if you choose to, and reading this text that is mostly just absurd, but points back to these ideas.
But there was stuff about knives and clocks. That's what I remember. Like they seem like to be about objects.
There's a lot of clocks. There were two phrases that repeated. There was one, inhale and exhale normally, and there was another one that was from a paper cutting or bookbinding machine that said, the clamp lowers, the knife lowers, the clamp lifts, the knife lifts. And I just found that kind of metaphorical, poetic. There was such a darkness to it.
That's the
When
one
taken
that
outside of this machine.
that's the one that I caught. I don't remember the inhale, exhale text from my experience of it, but I remember with like the feeling of the wall is also because of this darkness that around the text. Like knives, I mean, and clocks.
Yeah. I mean, I was thinking about knives. I wanted to include that segment. It made me think about pressure, or of feeling like you're under the knife to do something, or this kind of like that is related to something that you must do.
I mean, affectively standing in front of them, there's like, it's telling you all these things that you're supposed to do textually, linguistically, but the actual mode in which it is being presented, which is this curtain, this diaphanous, 3 layers, the text falling off, that is telling me to rush into it or to hug it or to pull at it or to play with it, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it has an affect that's um I'm not going to say comforting at all because it's not, but it has an affect that is more inviting of the body and less disciplining of it, right? Even
Mm-hmm.
though it forces you to move a certain way,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a discipline that you are offering us, but it's
Mm-hmm.
somehow gentler. Um,
I guess I'm interested in it being about disciplining language or about the idea of the ways in which the objects that we're surrounding ourselves with in a way discipline us.
mhm,
There's gestures to, being on Zoom and
right.
doing all this stuff. And a lot of them disappear. And there's like part of behaving around objects is learning this sort of physical language of how to hold things, how to be around them. But I don't know. I'm not interested in. I don't want to impose that onto the viewer in I don't want the work itself to be confrontational. I want it to be more of like a space to encounter that's separated from like the mode in which they're presented is, I felt like the bare minimum to separate it from the way you would normally encounter it.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there's
Um,
sheets of white, I guess. There's not sheets of
yeah,
paper, right? But
yeah, yeah,
the economy of disciplining are two different economies. Like I'm basically saying there's a register of the text, but then there's a register of the materiality of what I'm confronted with.
yeah, yeah,
You
yeah,
are
yeah.
offering us, which transforms it, translates it, and makes it somehow you're able to engage, and then you're like like the text then like makes you disengage because, well,
Mm-hmm,
there is
mm-hmm.
no knife around for me to actually do anything with. There is no clamp. It's just everything's happening in my head. And so
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
so the way in which it works on my body and on my brain are are these economies that I think are interesting when put together, because just one of them on its own wouldn't
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
create the work, like you needed both of them to interact with each other and with for
Right.
operate in that way.
Yeah, yeah. I guess I kept thinking, I did a lot of research on dance scores reading up to that piece. Um, and one of the things that I was thinking about was ways that dance notation had, it didn't end up manifesting in a direct way, but this was something I was researching for a while. Just looking at the way that motion was being recorded throughout time,
Mm-hmm.
of different dancers that have different shorthands that kind of, like they were 18th century, just these beautiful, almost like architectural looking drawings, and more modern era pictograms of what dances look like. Um, but I guess there's a gentleness to communicating movement that is meant to be performed rather than like executed. Maybe it's like perform versus execute. So trying to translate between those two worlds.
Yeah. I mean, we're in the context of an exhibition that's around bodies being disciplined by dance
Mm-hmm.
voluntarily. Uh, and
Right.
we're both doing, we both entered into that realm from our own respective practices and works and ways of engaging with the
Right.
world. And so
And we're both like kind of non-dancer. I mean, I identify as a non.
I'm a non-dancer.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm not a dancer.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so,
But it's
but I'm definitely body. I'm just not dance. I'm material
Yes,
more
yeah.
than body, actually. But
Yes, yes, same. I mean, I guess it's all a gradient of
mm,
relationship to movement. And I'm just thinking about discipline in relation to dance. And I don't, I wonder if that's how, if there are dancers who see it as like an undisciplining or a breaking apart of a structure, or I feel very unqualified to speak to this.
I think there are people who enter dance as adults who are not interested in the mastery as much as in thinking about the language of it.
Yeah, I guess that was my thoughts about the idea of discipline, of like the discipline of preparing for an open-ended, preparing for a question, preparing for if you read the book Gestures.
Mm-mm.
There's this book called Gestures by Willem Flusser. It's almost like it's always on this side of being a joke, like that entire book. And he's analyzing sort of social formation through formal gesture, but they're all like, it's not about smoking, it's about the gesture of holding a pipe in a particular way and how these movements relate to ideas that you may build about yourself, like this interactions. And he gets he's very serious about analyzing these movements that are completely absurd because they're all part of doing something that, like the act of writing, but he's analyzing like the motion of the hand. But yeah, just thinking about that relationship to dance of or observing children of like, you know, how do they do the thing?
Like, I guess examining from the outside a movement is different from inhabiting it. And then that is also
Yes,
different from honoring it.
the way that he writes about, they're all things he's obviously done. So they're both watching someone do it and what it feels like to touch something, hold something, sit in a particular. So yeah, but yes.
Yeah, but then I'm just thinking from the point of view of a dancer, like having like an awareness that they are very like aware that all bodies are the same at some point, like all bodies are different and all bodies are the same. And like
Mm-hmm.
Paula Escobar, the dance artist who was the dance teacher in the piece Hierarchy Study at Peter, because I did attend kindergarten dance classes with her. Like, I was going to dance class, and she was very careful always to tell the kids, like, they're like, "Oh, he's copying." He's like, "Well, you guys have the same body. You guys are human, aren't you?" She was both doing something that is about sharing and about being generous and about being, growing up, like teaching them the value of that as we grow up in this culture. But she was also coming from a point of view of a dancer, where she was like, this is dance, this is
Mm-hmm.
we all have bodies, like, and
Mm-hmm.
acknowledging that constantly for her, or it became important to acknowledge it with the children because they were invested in ideas of copying and mimicking, as well as invest, because that's the only way they know how to learn in some ways, but they're also invested in their
Right.
originality, like, oh my god, but he's copying me, or she's copying me, like, don't, like, stay away from me. So like, how do you
Right.
negotiate that community self-interest thing, the dyad? And she was addressing it through the body and through her dance lens constantly.
I'm just thinking about like kind of early ballet class experiences as a child where, I mean, everything you do is copying,
Mm-hmm.
like, or just like traditional sort of dance forms, you are repeating things until your body learns to remember it on its own.
Copying is how we learn, and I think it's given a bad rep.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and as long as the aim of the copying is not like fastidious fastidiousness, of exactitude, of achieving whatever the other person did. Like the aim of the copying is to
Right.
inhabit that ethos, and hence you're copying, and then something else will come out of it. I think that's the only way you can learn. I think my piece, the hierarchy study, was invested in investigating copying. Like it was a series of copying. That's all it was. The entire piece was copying.
Right.
They were either, whether it was translating into a drawing or from the drawing back to the dance, it was all copying. It was all trying to inhabit.
Right.
Provided.
But then that's like a score.
Yeah, that was the score. But copying was the score.